2025 was quite a year. The Switch 2 came out, Mario Kart was $80, Silent Hill got its first brand new title in 13 years, and a bunch of other stuff probably happened. Yet again, I didn't find myself interested in a ton of new AAA stuff, but I did delve a little deeper into my backlog and in some other curiosities this year, which ended up in some interesting fun finds. Those of you who've been around my channel for a while may remember my past yearly videos talking about all the games I played in 2023 and 2024. Well, this year I wanted to try out a slightly different format. The problem is, I just don't have a lot to say about a good chunk of the games that I play each year, and that pretty well reflected in last year's coverage, so this time around I'm going to be talking about my favorite and least favorite games I played throughout the year, whether new or old, with one final round for honorable mentions. I think this should work out a little better than my admittedly messy format I adopted previously, so without further ado, let's jump in with my favorite games that I played in 2025. Hollow Knight has cemented its place as one of the pillars of indie Metroidvanias, pretty much the gold standard at this point. I, for one, was incredibly late to the party as it took me until the week before the launch of Silksong to finally play it, and you know what? I get the hype. Now personally, I don't think Hollow Knight is quite as crazy good as people make it out to be, but coming off of the Metroid series, this game felt incredibly freeing. As soon as you jump in, you can pretty much go wherever you want. There are limits in the form of hazards you can't clear or heights you're unable to reach without the proper upgrade, but the extent to which you can explore off the bat is kind of astonishing. When I was a kid, this is what I imagined a Metroidvania would be, and it is beautiful, both figuratively and literally. I don't know how much R.E. Gibson was paid for his work on the game, but it was not nearly enough. The depth of the artwork, the sheer emotion that each background emits, the aesthetics of Hollow Knight have a personality of their own that greatly elevated my experience. I do tend to think that a lot of the more linear sections of the game's world design were among the game's biggest strengths, like the Path of Pain especially. I really do wish there were more areas like this. Aside from the boss fights, limitation breeds creativity and all that jazz. In all honesty, this is one of the main reasons why I'm so surprised I even like the game to this degree. Because the game is so open, most of the upgrades feel predictable and basic. They don't push you into traversing the world in a new way, they only lift certain barriers that you probably could have cleared without them. I can't fully explain how I feel while keeping this section concise, so the point is that I am surprised at just how inherently addictive it was to traverse the world despite that. Anything that looked like a hidden path I just had to see, any grubs I thought I could reach I'd grab, even if the grub father is in the contenders for the worst father of the century. Genuine question, how do you lose all 46 of your children? Regardless, I feel a little disappointed in myself for having taken so long to getting around to playing Hollow Knight because it really was a great experience and Silksong has been just about as fun, but I think I'd like to make a separate video talking about that game to fully express my thoughts someday. Cyberhook is a stylish first-person speedrunning, gunning, and grapple-hooking platformer that I'm not very good at, but it feels great to play. Everything down to the physics feels buttery smooth and the level design is compact, straight to the point, and with that easy-to-learn, hard-to-master gameplay, I found myself glued to this game from start to finish, just wanting one more try to get that perfect run. As you get better with the mechanics, you'll start to realize you can go even faster than you previously thought, which is where the real fun comes in. I don't typically speedrun games, but this one manages to make it fun just to move and swing around in the hub area, which, might I add, is a wonderful touch. There's a lot of replay value in Cyberhook, and even a bunch of community levels, which I haven't even delved into yet. Really, there's not much else to say. I think the gameplay speaks for itself. Alright, so before I get to talking about this one, I will be spoiling certain story elements of Alan Wake 2, as well as inadvertently spoiling the ending for the first game, but I feel like if I don't, there's nothing I'd be able to discuss with this game. I do apologize, but if you haven't played either game, I would highly recommend you do so and to skip over this segment. That being said, last year I got to playing the first game, and despite its issues, I really enjoyed it. I can admit the gameplay is not very good, but there's so many other things I loved about it. I think I came to love it, and especially the sequel, so much because I also happened to watch through the X-Files for the first time this year, and yeah, this feels like a concept straight out of that show. But about the sequel. Alan Wake 2 improves on almost every aspect of the original that I didn't like, while also making this already deeply layered story dive in even further with so much to unpack. You can kinda tell that after 13 years, they wanted Alan Wake's long-awaited sequel to be their magnum opus or something. I do think in some ways it stumbles and falters a bit with some of the new mechanics like the reality shifting or the gameplay turning to the modern survival horror standard, but the game somewhat makes up for it with the two perspectives of Alan and Saga that you can switch between at pretty much any time. Alan's perspective perspective has him dredging through the depths of the dark place, which takes the form of a warped New York City, which works surprisingly well. It takes a lot of inspiration from the aesthetics of films like Taxi Driver, which goes a long way to create this dreamlike, somewhat uneasy atmosphere with the neon signs lighting up the dark, damp streets. The game also allows you much more freedom to explore, with the city acting as the means of traversal between the major areas like the subway or the hotel. This time around, Alan can gain words of power that upgrade various abilities, and this alone helps Alan's side of the combat quite a bit, although unfortunately he doesn't get quite the same variety of enemies as Saga faces. There's also the aforementioned reality shifting, which honestly seemed a lot cooler in the original concept for the sequel. Here it serves to shift and swap out elements of certain areas, with you having to figure out which pieces fit into what slot to progress. I love the idea of using the different stages of writing as a means to shift the dark place. It makes for some cool visuals, but as a mechanic it felt a little bit undercooked. On the flip side, there's Saga's perspective, which sees her exploring Bright Falls and beyond, doing more investigative work utilizing another new system, the Mind Palace. This is where you'll be using the case board to piece things together bit by bit, or reaching out to the many suspects to interrogate them. This is the most pace-breaking element of the whole game, as there are several segments where you have to stop what you're doing and go back to the Mind Palace, and personally, I didn't mind it so much because there's already a lot to read in this game, which was totally fine with me since I love the game's story, the case board is fairly easy to piece together, and there is something inherently satisfying about seeing it inch ever closer to completion, but there were times when all I really wanted to do was keep exploring. I do get the idea, there's a lot of working parts in this story to keep track of, but it just takes so long to get through sometimes. Alan Wake 2 is a big improvement over the original and a great sequel, but unfortunately it does suffer some growing pains from the additions and changes made to the gameplay. There is a ton more I could say about this game, things I know I did skip over, but frankly, I couldn't possibly cover it in this short of time. Someday, I would love to make full videos on both games, but until then, if you've played the original and liked it, please go play Alan Wake 2. It's been quite a while since a game almost immediately made me feel like I was a kid again, and I was certainly surprised that that game was Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. I'm not super knowledgeable in the movies or the historical background involved in them. I'm much more of a casual enjoyer of this kind of action-adventure shtick, and the Great Circle delivers on that wonderfully whether you're a huge fan or were just introduced to the franchise. The combat and stealth mechanics are nothing you haven't seen before, but where the game made up for this for me was in its copious amount of collectibles. It's pretty close to the feeling that a sandbox platformer like Mario 64 gave me growing up. This is the exact kind of game I would have loved as a kid. Just about every major area is packed to the brim with content, new things to find and side quests to take on. Even some of the more linear sections where you'd be exploring ancient ruins had me engrossed, especially with some of the great puzzles throughout. Also, shoutouts to Troy Baker, who might as well have just stolen Harrison Ford's voice. He provides a scary accurate impersonation, which adds a lot more to the whole thing. Unfortunately, the DLC isn't quite as good, mostly because the entire story is linear with almost no room for exploration. Not to say I didn't enjoy it, I really did like the gladiator and serpent puzzles, and the final boss was fun, but if you're like me and just wanted another huge area to explore, you'll be left a bit underwhelmed. Even still, I'd love to see them take on another Indiana Jones adventure someday, because this one was a really fun surprise. But since we're all gonna die, there's one more secret I feel I have to share with you. I did not care for Donkey Kong Bonanza. This is the entry that I expect to put off at least a few people, and honestly, I'm right there with you because I really did want to like Donkey Kong Bonanza. Considering how long it's been since Tropical Freeze, DK deserved a strong return, but I'll be honest, this made no more than a splash for me. I am really getting tired of this insistence on sticking with open-ended level design across Nintendo franchises like the Breath of the Wild duology, Mario Kart World, and now Donkey Kong Bonanza, and I have a hard time believing it's gonna stop here. I just don't think anything about it works here, and it's for all the same reasons why I don't like Mario Odyssey anymore. Odyssey has incredibly good movement with a smooth, expressive moveset that makes it feel fun just to jump around. Unfortunately, there are just too many power moons practically handed out like candy and proportionately very few that actually do ask you to use your extended moveset. Bonanza follows similar design principles while somehow watering down the gameplay even further with a much more limited moveset, way too many filler levels, and once again, far too many collectibles. Now obviously, I didn't expect or want Donkey Kong to go hopping, skipping, and throwing Pauline around like Cappy, but I think it's an important point to address because this alone limits the level design more than before. Though we do get the all-new Bonanza transformations as compensation, which all kinda suck. I like the idea, but there is next to no utility for half of these for most of the game, and the only one I did find useful was just because it helped me to skip over the level design. And before you go all, you control the buttons you press on me, I'm sorry, but I barely even have to try to do this. There's an argument to be made for optimizing the fun out of a game, but I feel like that should only apply in extreme situations, and this just isn't one of those to me. Progression is no longer tied to any kind of collectibles either. You can play the game from start to finish while only having collected one Banandium gem. I did still try to seek them out because there's a mildly more gratifying incentive to do so within the game's skill tree, which lets you unlock a few extra moves for your base and Bonanza forms, better stats, pretty much the expected upgrades, which inevitably led to the gems becoming far less satisfying to collect in the late game. What doesn't help any of this is the aforementioned filler levels, because I did not like any of the sublayers past the canyon. I mean, there's literally a landfill as a sublayer. I don't know how much more on the nose you can get than that. I'll give them some credit, the feast layer was pretty fun, though I am a sucker for amusement park levels and games. The biggest problem this game has for me is that nothing you're doing feels meaningful in the grand scope. It just feels like I'm constantly pushing forward with barely any effort and hardly anything given in return, and that is exactly the problem with making a game this open-ended. When you hardly ask me to do anything for the platforming, you give me bonanzas that you never really need to use, you don't even require any collectibles to be grabbed, what am I supposed to take away from the experience? Who is this made to appeal to? There is a clear lack of confidence in almost every area of Bonanza's design, and I think that's really disappointing coming from this team. Coming into this, even as someone who didn't like Odyssey, I was really hoping Bonanza would be the strong start for the Switch 2 that Mario Kart World wasn't, but I just don't see it. I enjoyed portions of Bonanza, but in retrospect, this has to be the most mindless, forgettable game I've played all year, and I can't help but see it as a cruel joke to even suggest that this is a candidate for Game of the Year. Barely pushing boundaries, hardly innovating in any sense, and not utilizing the elements that are familiar in any particularly thought-provoking way, Donkey Kong Bonanza feels like just another in the line of incredibly safe Nintendo revivals, and even as an outsider looking in, I can't help but find that incredibly disappointing for a series that deserves so much better. Final Fantasy VII Remake was one of my favorite games that I played last year. The characters were fantastic, the combat was addicting, and it all left me wanting so much more. I was dying to jump into Rebirth the instant it came out, but I already felt like I was missing a few of the necessary story beats to have at least a basic understanding of what happened in the first part, since honestly, the finale left me incredibly confused. I did end up playing the original version, but I also had some curiosity for the prequel title, Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion, since Zack is featured prominently in Rebirth's cover art. Going into it, I knew it was a PSP game, so I figured whatever I was getting wouldn't be quite up to snuff with the FF7 remake, but I figured that there's plenty of great handheld RPGs out there, so why couldn't this be good? Crisis Core follows the formative years of Zack Fair leading up to the Nibelheim incident, and pretty much nothing about this story at all enhanced my experience with the original game. In fact, I'd argue in some way it made it worse. To my understanding, Zack's backstory was already somewhat conceptualized during the development of Final Fantasy VII, but learning that was incredibly surprising because this just feels like a cheap C-tier anime with all the corny dialogue to boot. I just found there to be nothing with any real meat to chew on here, no characters that I latched onto, and unfortunately that goes double for the combat. FF7 Remake fleshed out this action RPG style incredibly well with unique party members and loads of different materia builds to try out with fast, frantic combat. Crisis Core features a much stripped down version of this combat. Zack is the only player controllable on the battlefield regardless of party members, which is a pretty bad start, but I was willing to give it the benefit of the doubt. Again, this is a PSP game. The combat also features a new system called the Digital Mind Wave, which is basically just a slot machine that constantly rolls in the background of battle. The DMW serves to give passive buffs and debuffs like temporary and limited MP, heightened materia stats, or to grant summons or special moves. The idea behind this system was to prevent combat from getting repetitive, but if anything, it makes it more repetitive by giving out rolls for free. I don't know, man, maybe instead make it to where you have to deal a certain amount of damage to build up a DMW meter that you can then choose to roll when charged. You know, let me earn it instead of just being allowed to spam magic for free because the game gave me a participation award. There's also a new materia fusion system, which I would guess is another attempt to add depth, but these fusions are just too powerful. Any elemental materia could be fused with Esuna to provide the incredibly powerful silence effect, which prevents the use of magic attacks, on top of poisoning, also on top of the base element damage. And this is just on one materia slot. This was so powerful that that the exact same build carried me throughout the entire game. And okay, in fairness, once I found my groove in 7 Remake, I didn't have to change my materia out very often either, but at least in that game you have other unique party members to swap between and a combat system that doesn't reward you for doing nothing. I really did try to give this game the benefit of the doubt, but it is so uninteresting and tedious as a story, a game, and as an entry in the compilation of Final Fantasy VII. I didn't go into this game expecting to love it the same way I did 7 Remake, but man, I was hoping to get something out of this whole experience. The background for Zack doesn't benefit the original FF7 or Remake, and I have my doubts about what it allowed to Rebirth as well. And frankly, I still don't think Zack is any more of an interesting character than I did before. I guess at some point I'm gonna have to satisfy my curiosity for Dirge of Cerberus, but I'm tempering my expectations, especially knowing just how different it is from the rest of the games. Okay, so I'm kinda cheating with this one, but I think it's only fair to include given how much more time I've unfortunately sunk into it and because I chose not to even talk about it last year. I think we've all had at least one PvP game that was either always a dumpster fire or started fun and slowly spiraled into one, and for me, that was the latter with Dead by Daylight. I got into it via recommendation from a friend, and I feel like I am a worse person because of it, and yet I have played this game for far too long. Now there's a lot I could choose to talk about from this year alone, like how awful the Ghoul and Crossu were to play against at launch, how they continue to overtune every killer to boost sales, how every single patch there's another broken killer as a result of the years of spaghetti code buildup, or I could choose to talk about how the devs do not listen to the community and don't understand how to balance their game at all. Early this year, there was a Go Next epidemic, as I'll call it, that was atrociously bad. Every other game, survivors would give up at the drop of a hat, like you could look at them the wrong way and they'd point at the hook. It was so bad that the outcry finally got the attention of the devs who claimed to dedicate themselves to a quality of life initiative and Go Next prevention update to stop this from happening. This was in February. As of writing, we are in November and still no closer to an actual solution. The problem is, casual survivor mains are so incredibly entitled that they feel like most killers are overpowered and that they can't possibly win against them, so their solution is to just give up. Even as recently as a month ago, I still had players giving up against killers like the Ghoul, for example, who, mind you, I despised at launch because of the absurd auto-aim on his main ability, which frankly still needs some work, and even I can admit that there is counterplay to this killer now. Even earlier today, as of recording, I had a survivor give up at 4 gens on their first hook, and you know what? Those 3 other survivors played so well that I ended up with 2 kills by endgame, like they could have gotten out as well. The devs want to appeal to casuals who have a bullheaded unwillingness to learn how to play against and counter killer powers, and just in general, how to play the game. This is coming from someone who 82% of their hours come from survivor matches. The palette density update was one of their worst ideas. It helps the bad survivors who only pre-drop every palette by giving them more shit to drop, but it helps the good survivors who know how to conserve resources even more. Higher tier killers like your Blights or Nurses are unaffected because their powers are strong enough that skilled players can outplay palettes or just about any other tile, but a killer like Trapper, the Hag, pretty much any M1 killer, you might as well take them out back and show them the flowers. How much can they continue to cater to casual players before they realize it's not going to fix anything, it's just going to drive the long-time players away? The same survivors they're catering to are the ones who still bitch and moan about tunneling. Even now, I get players calling me a bad player purely for tunneling, when no, that's not the case at all. If I choose to tunnel, that is a strategy, something which yes, can ensure a swift victory, but if done against the wrong player, it can be detrimental. By tunneling, you risk facing a decisive strike user, a competent player who knows how to loop, or lots of body blocks from other survivors, but if you can't find any other players or you want pressure early into a match, this is one of the best strategies for a reason. The problem with spreading hooks and playing fair according to the survivor rulebook is that just because you play fair doesn't mean everyone else will. I have had so many matches where all the survivors wanted to do was hide, and they do the same thing right after unhooking their teammate, leaving them high and dry, and at that point you forfeit any right to complain about tunneling. Ultimately, if a killer chooses to tunnel, it's up to the survivor to play well enough to avoid getting caught, because believe me, I have thrown matches trying to tunnel. It does happen. Due to all of this, I don't get upset anymore when I'm facing a tunneling killer, because expecting them to play nice when it's literally their objective to kill all survivors with there currently being no better way in a majority of matches is like if killers expected all survivors to stop what they're doing for 20 seconds after finishing a generator. Both sides do what they have to win the game, and whether or not you think that that choice is obnoxious just tunneling in particular is only so much more prominent now because of the changes the devs want to introduce, starting with that palette density update. And it boggles my mind because this whole problem was fixed in the 9.2.0 PTV, in which they were testing a new system which would reward killers for unique hooks. Barring in mind some of the other changes which made this a bit of a monkey's paw situation, I really do think they were on the right track, but unfortunately they've backpedaled majorly on the rewards, keeping the benefits for survivors, which is super cool and whatever, man, why am I surprised? If they'd update the incredibly outdated tutorial, even if it was just with graphics and GIFs showcasing how the mechanics work, I think that would do a great deal to helping casuals instead of babying them, because as it is, the only good resource is YouTube. Honestly, I could keep going, but I think I've said more than enough. You might question why I continue playing Dead by Daylight with these problems in mind, and honestly, I do enjoy playing the game to some degree, but I'd liken it to a gambling addiction where I live off of the high of one good match for the next 50 losses. Alright, starting off our honorable mentions is Whisper Mountain Outbreak. I got this one on a whim to play with my friend, and I came out a little disappointed because of that. It's mostly on me for not properly researching the game beforehand, but the idea of a new multiplayer survival horror game just sounded insanely fun to me. Unfortunately for me, that's not really what this is. Whisper Mountain Outbreak is an early access extraction shooter with survival horror and roguelike elements. As of writing, there are 8 missions with free mission types, free classes to choose from, 12 weapons, and a decent amount of upgrades. Most of the missions, aside from 2 of them, have your squad sent off to different locations to extract a certain important item, exploring, solving puzzles, and fighting through different hordes of monsters and whatever these things are. Each class plays fairly similarly, most of their differences come in stats like faster revival speed or higher melee strength. Along the way, you can even upgrade your skills, base stats, and expand your inventory for easier exploration, which is a pretty satisfying gameplay loop. One thing I don't like as much is how you can return to the same mission multiple times to recoup your losses from a recent death. It really doesn't feel like it's in the spirit of a survival horror experience. But I think the biggest problem the game has right now, and something I'm not all too confident they'll improve upon with future updates, is the lack of replayability. Each mission has randomized elements like slightly different map layouts or puzzle solutions, but honestly these aspects are kind of shallow because once you've solved a puzzle the first time, it doesn't really matter if the code is different, you're still solving it in the same way. The pool of puzzle types is very limited, but even with more of them, it won't necessarily make the game more fun. Ultimately, I think advertising this primarily as a co-op survival horror game feels a bit disingenuous to the actual experience you're getting, which is much more action-focused with light survival horror elements. Not to say that isn't fun in its own right, because I did enjoy my time with the game quite a bit actually. It's just that some of these elements feel a bit at odds with making what could end up being a decently fun extraction shooter. It is fun if you have friends or can match up with competent players in public lobbies, but in its current state, expect 3 to 4 hours of content. For just $8, I think it's worth it, but your mileage may vary. I was honestly not sure what to make of this one. RE Remake sits in a weird position as the current black sheep among the remakes, and as such I went into it expecting to be disappointed, and I was in quite a few ways, but I also enjoyed it to a surprising degree. I think it was always going to be difficult to top the RE2 remake, but Capcom really shot themselves in the foot by cutting so many concepts and aspects of the original version, no real incentives to replay the game, and the only side content being included through their own asymmetrical spin-off no one wanted. But if you're purely viewing this as a companion piece to RE2 and managed to get it on a sale, it's decent. Not something I could see myself coming back to, but I did like the slightly faster pacing to the combat and design in general, though that often meant the areas you'd be going through were a bit shallow. It really started to sink in what I was getting myself into when it came to the Nemesis chases. I see the vision, these could have been incredibly cool, but I hate how there's only one notable section where Nemesis is physically chasing you. And do not even get me started on his mutations. Like, I could honestly say I found his base form much more intimidating and scary than this beast dog form he mutates into throughout the game. Then there's some of the action elements sprinkled in through new mechanics like the dodge, which took me much longer than I'd like to admit to get a hang of, particularly thanks to the hunters. Love those guys. Really though, I think RE Remake's biggest sin is that it just doesn't have anything that really sold me on the whole experience. It feels a bit like the appetizer before the main course, and in some way I can respect wanting a more focused story, but it feels like a lot was sacrificed with not much given in return. I did have my fun with it, but that's about the best you'll hear from me. I'd rather replay 2 or 4 any day of the week, but I do need to get around to the original versions of 2 and 3 sometime next year. When it comes to licensed games, I can't say that there are very many that still interest me today, purely thanks to how many of these end up being low-budget, low-effort rush jobs. So when something even mildly ambitious like the X-Files Resist or Serve crops up, I am immediately interested. I became a fan of the series earlier this year, and to my surprise, there aren't that many games based off it. Though I found it incredibly fitting that of the two that exist, one is an actual survival horror game. Resist or Serve was marketed as free lost episodes taking place in Season 7, which see Mulder and Scully investigating the deaths of 3 people in the town of Red Falls, which just happened to coincide with the reappearance of 2 previously missing sisters who fancy an interest in the occult. All the evidence points to one Frank Hawthorne being the true suspect, except that he died before the murder victims did. I really love the setup and just in general the writing because I found it to be surprisingly good. They actually got one of the Season 8 and 9 story editors, Thomas Schnauz, to write most if not all of the dialogue here, and I feel like he really nailed Mulder and Scully's dynamic. It helps a lot that all the original cast members return to voice their respective characters as well, which adds an extra layer of charm to the whole experience. Much like with the original X-Files game though, it feels like David and Gillian were just here for a paycheck. I mean, there is zero emotion in most of their deliveries.
Oh God, sir, hang on.
Somehow I know she's still alive. I've seen a vision of her, cold and afraid. I don't know what it was. There's a man hurt outside. I need a phone.
But as someone who watched the entire series before even looking at this game, it's cool nonetheless to have a classic X-Files adventure with not just David and Gillian, but Mitch Pileggi and Tom Braidwood, Dean Haglund, Bruce Harwood, and even Nicholas Leah as Krychek. The gameplay leaves a bit to be desired. As expected, it's very rough around the edges, with some of the most awkward fixed camera angles among any survival horror game I've ever played. One of my bigger issues is that in a good chunk of X-Files episodes, there's at least 1 or 2 supporting characters who tag along with Mulder and or Scully to help with the investigation, and given both of them have slightly different campaigns, I feel like there was a great opportunity for that went missed here. Instead, you're left to explore a town which is already dead, with very few people to talk to throughout the entire game. I wouldn't be surprised if the budget was the limiting factor, but unfortunately the areas don't offer a whole lot else to make up for it. Unfortunately, the game also suffers from a really bad difficulty spike near the end, with one of the most ridiculous final boss fights in any game that I have ever played. But I honestly would like to make a full video on the game at some point, so we'll have to leave that rant for another day. Resist or Serve is mostly fun as a novelty, and incredibly charming if you're a huge fan of the series, but I could never in good faith recommend this to anyone else unless you're really curious. And that's pretty much all of the noteworthy games I played this year. If you're at all curious, you can check out my backlog to see rankings for all of the games that I played, plus a few I haven't actually finished yet. I could have finished a few more games that I really wanted to include on this list, like FF7 Rebirth, but unfortunately, random bouts of depression decided to kick me in the shin, and that really screwed with my workflow for pretty much the entire year. For the most part, that's why I didn't upload this year, and I do sincerely apologize for that. I do hope to make 2026 a better year for my channel, but I feel like I say this to myself at the end of every year and nothing ever changes, so how about this? Expect nothing from my channel and maybe you'll be surprised. Or not, I don't really know, I can't really promise anything, but if you watched all the way to the end of this, thank you. Do consider liking the video and subscribing, and maybe let me know what you've played in the comments down below. I've been Wyrlwind, and I'll see you all next year.